from the heart. But in order not to forget anything, I have to write it all down. If I may, I would like to start off with some thank yous. Firstly, thank you to you all for taking the time to be here. It means the world to Dad and I know it would to Mum. Those that came from interstate, we really appreciate it and all of your efforts. For those that couldn't make it, thank you for being here in spirit and all of your well wishes today. Firstly, to my colleagues past and present, thank you for your flexibility in taking extra kids, extra playground duties, giving me 10 minutes when I needed it over the past 3 and a bit years, hot chip afternoons, a beer at the pub, or a hug was sometimes all I needed. And so many of you have been there for me in so many different ways, and I am just blown away by the simple check-ins that I've received from you all, and wanted to give you my sincere thanks. I could not be more grateful or more lucky to have you. To my mum's colleagues, past and present, thank you for the lunch dates you continued on with her well after she left the workplace, and the catch-ups and the coffees. I know she always looked forward to them, and she genuinely cared for you all. She was so interested and so invested in who you were, not just what you did. It wasn't uncommon for her to tell me something that was going on in your lives, and she kept up with you all either online, face-to-face, or over the phone. To our family, those immediate and those more distant in relation, you're here today because you mattered to us, whether it was the long-distance messenger calls, emails, phone calls, we appreciated them all. Whether it was the holiday get-togethers or coming around to say hello, you were never far from Mum's conversations and stories. Stories that were recent or as far back as she could remember. She was so grateful to the time you gave her and the place you reserved for her in your hearts. She would often talk about you to myself and Dad and would always be so hopeful for whatever your dreams and challenges were that you were facing in that time. To Mum and Dad's friends, lifelong and close, it's so wonderful to see you all in one room. Although I'm saddened it is not under better circumstances, she would be so humbled to see you all here and so thankful to see you rally around my dad. Your friendship meant so much to her. If I may, I want to take the moment to thank a few people in particular. Thank you, Elizabeth, Mum's cousin, who flew down from Brisbane to spend a few days with Mum when she moved into palliative care. I'm sorry again that I handed you, a gimpy local, the keys to my car so that you could drive home without any directions or a car fitted with GPS while I took the ambulance. But truly thank you for being the Lewis girl that my mum needed and the connection to her home in Darling Downs before she bid us farewell. To Alan and Diane, thank you for the sourdough loaves and lemon slices. Thank you in particular to Alan for being there and checking in when you returned from your trip to see Dad after Mum had passed. The hug you gave him in the hall was something I'm sure he'd waited a long time for and helped heal a small part in his heart. To Peter Slusser and Peter Ferrier, it's the same for you. Getting Dad out of the house to catch up for a milkshake or a beer gives him that connection and helped him feel a little bit more hot. To Ayla and Brendan, for years you've been my shoulder to cry on, and I wanted to thank you. Words can't do justice what it means to have your love and support. Thank you, Ayla, for coming over a couple of days before Mum passed and sharing a sneaky chocolate cake with us and giggling as Mum requested a latte as well. The reason we giggle at this is because my mum wasn't actually supposed to be eating anything, but certainly pushed the limits when she did. I know she felt better for seeing your face and seeing the love that you had for me and how it would endure beyond her physical time. You have cried with me and heard years of my rants and raves and provided me with a safe place to retreat when it became a bit too much. Leon and Simone, that's the same for you as well. There was a moment in an event where Genevieve, our lovely photographer, asked Simone if she would like a photo with her daughter. Simone pulled both Ayla and I up, and I felt a little less lost in that moment when you said, "I'll be your mum." The photo, by the way, is hilarious, as Simone and I hugged and Ayla was off to the side. I'm getting there. During Mum's final weeks, her world was kept incredibly small and unfussy at her request. She preferred not to see people, as she found it to be very tiring physically and emotionally. Perhaps one of my most profound set of thank yous is for my auntie sweet Uncle David. Sorry. There was no way that Sue was going to be kept from my mum, and Mum learnt that very quickly. She didn't need to put on a show and was just happy to listen to you talk. On May 27th, when my mum passed, my first phone call was to you two. And my Uncle David so gracefully said, "They're coming over." You can all imagine, I'm sure, these moments are incredibly confronting and difficult, but you did it with love in your hearts. Sue and I sat on the couch together by Mum's side, having one last coffee with her, talking about our love for her, and how much we missed her already. That meant the world to me. David, my dad's twin brother, took on the difficult job of making phone calls and took Dad for a short walk, helping to keep him upright and moving forwards. These moments were difficult and you did them so freely, so thank you. Finally, there are many people that I still want to publicly acknowledge, even though they're not here today. Firstly, a big one is Dr. Yada Kanjanapan. We made incredible effort to learn how to say her name. It was the least that we could do. She was my mum's medical oncologist from day one. She was the most stubborn woman I have ever met. She refused to give up on my mum, and she knew the fight that my mum had in her. Mum adored Yada and held her so close to her heart. She really loved her doctor, and how lucky are we. Yada would always say to her, "I have a plan," and Mum knew everything would be okay. Even at the very end, Yada was out there fighting other doctors and surgeons to keep things going for Mum, but unfortunately couldn't win those battles. Dad and I will be forever grateful to her. Robin Sayer was my mum's surgical oncologist, who is considered the very best gynecological oncologist in the world. She operated on my mum in 2021 at the Lifehouse Cancer Centre in Sydney, where she performed a full hysterectomy. I remember the day of the surgery. They said it would take approximately 6 to 7 hours, and she rang after 3. My stomach dropped and I expected the very worst. I'll never forget her first words. "Bronte, it's Robin. Everything's gone fantastically. Your mum's doing really well," and I got it all. We had lots of those moments because of those women. We had nurses and doctors galore who shared moments of joy and sadness, and those who bent over backwards to help us do things and get her right when things were dire. I prefer not to use the term fought or battled when thinking of cancer, but rather the term of lived with. Mum saw her cancer diagnosis as something that moved beside her, that she needed to live around and adapt to. Life couldn't stop and wait, so rather than tear herself to pieces fighting and battling each day, she lived alongside her diagnosis. We all did. So here are a couple of things I would like you to hear, as it's important to me. Mum lived with high-grade ovarian cancer stage 3B. There are many different types of ovarian cancer, over 15 different types. This was hers. After ovarian cancer moved into our lives, we found out what an ugly roommate it is, Nothing could have prepared the naive version of myself for what we were up against. In my mind, you got cancer, you treated it, and then you went on. Most of the time, at least. I became so used to hearing about how survival rates were improving and how there were so many more treatment options out there to combat this vicious disease. I saw fundraisers galore and thought we were going to have a good chance. It was 2021 after all. What I didn't realise was how poorly funded the most deadly female reproductive cancer was and how little people knew about it. What I thought was this form of cancer only affected older women, but the reality is that that's not true. The youngest girl was recently diagnosed at the age of 11 months old, and I'm sure you saw more recently on the news a gorgeous 10-year-old with stage 4 and her friend raising over $100,000 for her cause. The ovarian cancer 5-year survival rate has stayed stagnant. It's improved only marginally since the 1970s and remains less than 50%. The way we treat it hasn't changed much either. You can't treat it with radiation, and chemotherapy and surgery really only go so far. The devastating reality of this means that my mum had the same treatment options and the same chance of survival as her mother did, who died from the same disease in 1973. This means that in 50 years, we've made no progress. There's no early detection test, no better treatment options, no vaccination, no preventative care. What this means is that you're treated for it, you'll most likely respond and recover well, even the most serious grades like Mum had. However, the words that are uttered to you are closely linked to the journey of waiting for it to return and how quickly it will return. Some people have heard me say this before, and Mum's surgical oncologist, Dr. Robert Sayer, said that when explaining the life cycle of ovarian cancer, it helps to view it as a dandelion. The fluffy seeds spread so easily and so far. They are so small to detect that no matter how hard you try, you simply can't get it all, even if you think you do. My mum was genuinely the very best patient to look after, and somehow simultaneously the most diabolical patient to look after. She genuinely didn't notice when things were bad, and on her worst days it was me convincing her that she was sick. She would often look past me while I would be trying to tell her we need to go to the hospital. I recall the day where my mum had a significant internal bleed. We didn't know it at the time, but I knew something was wrong. And she was just simply annoyed because Murphy, our dog, stood on the remote and deleted the show that she was watching. The reality was that she was just so tough and so unfazed that I couldn't trust her. I spent much of my life these last few years checking in, taking temperatures, doing visual checks, Googling safe foods, crushing tablets, trying to figure out how to fix her in moments of high stress when things went really wrong. Checking in became a compulsion of mine, and I knew that I drove her nuts doing this, and she hated it. But I felt so very responsible for keeping her safe and keeping her going, and at the end of the day, she knew that I had the best of intentions. The reality was, it was good most of the time. Most of the time we smiled and laughed and carried on our little lives, but there were days where Dad and I could hardly breathe. She had 3 infections that caused delirium, which shook the 3 of us dramatically. She had internal bleeds, neutropenia 3 times where her immune system collapsed, fevers, the worst reflux you could ever imagine, a broken back, osteoarthritis, a loss of taste, smell, fatigue, pain, kidney damage, yet even after all that, she still smiled and made it on one final trip with me to Singapore in December of 2023. Beggars belief as to how tough somebody must be to be able to do all of that. Mum was diagnosed with ovarian cancer 3 separate times. First it was in her ovaries, then the lining of her stomach, then finally her liver and her spleen. Each time Mum continued her journey with determined spirits and a sense of positivity. In March this year she began a particularly difficult regime of chemo before she developed a bowel obstruction in April. Mum's final wishes were to come home and sit on the couch with the boys and watch TV. Maybe go to the local shops or take one last ride in my car. That was all she wanted. Thanks to her palliative care doctor and Claire Holland House, we were able to support her and bring her home. We were told she would survive for no more than 2 days at home, and that we needed to prepare to take her to hospice, as the strain of medical responsibility would likely be too much for me to bear. I am so proud of my mum, and so in awe to say that we kept her at home for 23 days. Her will never failed, and she was still very much Christine Lalor, right until the very end. Almost done. She had an NG tube that went into her nose and down to her stomach that she named Mabel. A walker she called Gertrude, a catheter she named Cynthia, and a syringe driver called Stephen. I don't know where they came from. Mum passed with Dad and I by her side, with her hands in ours, and I made sure that the final words she heard were nothing but love and encouragement. Mum knew about today, and she knew that it would be a touch of teal. She knew you would all be here in the spring, and all she wanted was to treat you all to lunch and a drink or two one last time. Mum was a woman who loved life and was so deeply content. She would often tell me that she never strived to be happy, but instead wanted to be content and at peace. It was the small things that she took the most joy from. Clipping recipes from magazines, the latest Jamie Oliver Christmas special, her British murder mysteries, and Friday nights. Even once she was retired, she would still giddily say, "Guess what? It's Friday night." She needed nothing from anybody and was just so endlessly delighted by these small pleasures. She loved reading Bill Bryson, Georgia Heyer, Alexander McCall Smith, and wasn't afraid to indulge in a new idea, a Woman's Weekly, or a Reader's Digest. Mum was almost completely deaf, so reading allowed her to switch into a world where she could keep up. She was immensely intelligent and book smart, but never let on. Anytime Mum and I would go somewhere for as long as I could remember, she would pull out her book and pass the time with her mind running wild. In fact, it wasn't unusual for her to pull out a Jeremy Clarkson book while waiting for some sort of serious medical appointment and get the giggles to herself. Then she would look around the room and see others reveling in her joy. I'd try my hardest to stay on track with what books were coming out and when, and then slip her a copy of it, or a Dimmicks voucher which made her eyes light up. I recall more recently buying the Clarkson's Farm and Book series for her birthday just gone. She was thrilled and loved his deadpan writing style and sense of humour, which she shared. I watched her take one of the books and gently hold it to her face. She breathed it in with a smile and said she loved the smell of a good, brand new book. That book now sits under her pillow, with the bookmark halfway through from where she placed it last, and I will leave it there forevermore. A week before Mum passed, she asked me for what I thought. She said spring muslin. I went looking everywhere for some sort of flowery scarf and bought several out to her, wondering why she suddenly wanted to dress up. She was completely puzzled and said, "I said sprig muslin." The book, realising my mistake, I giggled and she said, "Oh, you are funny," and watched me go and find her favourite book. I returned and sat next to her and said, "Do you want me to read it to you?" To which she replied, "No, just pop it under my pillow." I did, but first I opened the book and looked at the date and remembered it too was the book that she read to her mother in 1973, just before she passed. Dad and I sent a copy of this book with her to heaven, but her version stays with me forever. Almost there. While my mum was 70, she certainly didn't behave like a 70-year-old. She and I never stopped sending each other videos, text messages, jokes, reels, memes. I could hear her often in the other room giggling at something she would find or something that I sent her. She loved the millennial boomer generational divide, and her sense of humour was so dry that sometimes even Dad and I weren't entirely sure whether she was joking or not. It wasn't uncommon for Mum to join us at the dinner table and randomly start spouting some very dirty joke, and Dad and I would try so hard not to endorse it and keep a straight face, but we always failed when she acted up the part so well. Mum loved sitting outside in the backyard on a spring day with the dogs, sometimes in the shade of the blossoms with a cup of coffee and a magazine. She was an incredibly peaceful person. She would often bring a few biscuits, a piece of cake, and some other snacks with her that told you that she was in for the long haul. After she passed, I was looking at photos on her phone to find that most of them were just videos or photos of her walking around the yard filming flowers and spaces that she called hers. She enjoyed baking but loved sampling other people's baking even more. Sticky date pudding was a favourite of hers, and any time I made it at home she would shiver with excitement. Chocolate mousse is another favourite of hers, and it was all she wanted one last time. Today that's on the menu as a little tribute to her. Mum was no longer allowed to eat on palliative care, but I took the course that I needed to learn how to drain her tube so that she could still eat without digesting it. What that meant is that she got to have her chocolate mousse, jellies and lattes one more time. She did ask for a chicken and cheese sandwich, but I felt that was pushing it. There are a couple of photos of her in the video you'll see where she has a tube up her nose. These are her palliative photos, but you will see her smile and her chocolate mousse in hand. Mum didn't go much on soft drinks or juices, but would favourably talk about pink lemonade in her childhood and strive to find the perfect dry white wine, one that made your lips pucker. Each Christmas and birthday, she would break out the bubbly and enjoy a champagne in her fancy champagne flutes. It was something she loved to share, particularly with everybody else, heaping her oddly cut strawberries in with it to taste. Mum had some unusual chocolate preferences, which you'll notice in front of you today, that I didn't quite understand. Cherry ripes, Moro bars, duck liver pates, strange pasties, chutneys and spicy food. She loved everything different and unique, partly because she was creative and her love of food stretched far beyond the shores of Australia, but also because it meant she never had to share it with Dad or I. She was cunning and clever like that, and it took me far too long to clock onto her ways, but I love her for it. Mum always enjoyed her movies and TV shows. This particularly became the case once she became sick, as it was one of the things she could still enjoy during treatment. I grew up with a really odd collection of tastes, and despite only being 4 or 5 years old, would watch things with her like I Love Lucy, Open All Hours, The Darling Buds Have Made, Diagnosis Murder, Frasier, Touched by an Angel, and Highway to Heaven. Didn't matter how old I was or how old she was. Anytime anyone would kiss on TV or have a romantic moment, her eyes would roll so far back into her head, and she would shudder and say, "All right, that's enough, move along." Despite this, I remember watching a couple of TV series here and there, and if my mum thought the character was handsome or charismatic, she would cheekily grin at me and say, "He can put his boots under my bed." To which Dad would just close his eyes and shake his head laughing. Mum often joked that her best friend was Elvis Presley. She would hear his music or see him on TV and melt. His music was often played around the house, especially when she would be doing a spring clean. The windows would be open and the music would waft around the house. Roy Orbison was another one of her favourites, but Mum wasn't shy about listening to new music and had such an incredibly open mind, which made talking to her about these things so engaging and so exciting. Of all the things I love about Mum, the thing that I loved most was how generous she was. It didn't occur to me until I got older that not everybody was like that. She spent much of my primary school years volunteering to help out in any way she could. She cleaned all the windows at the church on a regular basis. She ran school working bees. She did the newsletter. She ran the fete. She worked in the canteen. She did annual Heart Foundation door knock appeals. And she gave generously to particular charities that held firm places in her heart. She even helped me in the classroom when I became a teacher. These, however, were just the tip of the iceberg, and it was more than these official things that she did that made her kindness so profound. It was the way that I would see my friends and she would say, "Give my love to Kyle. Give Charlene a hug for me," or something like that. Can I treat your team at work to lunch at the end of the term? To which I have to say, "No, Mum, I'm 30, it's kind of weird." Every night without fail, I would hear her shuffle up the hallway before she would poke her head in. Some days she could hardly walk, but she would still say to me, "Can I do anything for you?" And I guarantee if I asked her, she would have done it. If you liked something and Mum could get it, she would, because she wanted people around her to be happy. She wanted all of us to be content. In the weeks leading up to her passing, I passed on a message to her friend saying, "I'm really sorry, but Mum wanted me to let you know she can't treat you coffee for her birthday this year." To desperately trying to find a gift hamper for my auntie when she had her surgery, texting her and asking, "What chocolate are you allowed to eat?" Mum would sit with you for hours and do whatever you needed if it meant helping you and bringing you a slice of peace or relief to your life. Mum was this little presence that would follow you around, always picking up as she went, changing things, arranging things, moving things, always moving everything. Often the reality was it would drive me a little nuts, and it wasn't until Mum was at home on palliative care, and Liz, you were actually here for this conversation, so you can... Mum was so concerned that she couldn't help us look after her. She was saddened that she couldn't do anything for anyone anymore. It was in this moment that it clicked for me. The nurse said to her, "That's how you show people that you love them, isn't it? By doing things for them." Mum nodded and said, "I suppose so." It was then that all those trivial moments of her doing little things here and there, that I realised that that's how she showed people she loved them. And being unable to do anything left her fearing she couldn't do that anymore. The nurse, Liz and I all said it was time for us to show her how much we loved her, but I know it broke her heart. Over the 23 days that my mum was on palliative care, she met many different nurses who all fell in love with her. She would ask them about their day, tell them to drive safe, and thank them for their efforts, and God forbid she would apologise for being such a bother. One of the nurses sat for such a long time one day and smiled as my mum slept on the couch. She was in awe of how peaceful she was. She looked at me and said, "Your mum has so much grace." And she did, and she does. If I could be anything in this world, it would be to be a little bit more like Mum. Imagine a world where we're all a little bit more graceful and all a little bit more kind like her. Thank you. This is running everywhere. I've just got a little video for you, and then I think it'll be time for us to eat.